They joked about my inability to handle my drinks, but my son quietly pulled me aside and said, "Dad, she's been seeing someone else." I had never been a drinker. It wasn't due to any personal choice or deep moral conviction. I simply lacked the tolerance for it. A glass of wine, maybe two, and I was good. But on that particular evening, I found myself in the midst of a full-fledged dinner party. Friends, colleagues, and a few old university acquaintances were all gathered under one roof. The tension in the air was palpable, a thick, invisible fog that clung to everything. Yet, the worst part was something I hadn't anticipated, the subtle, mocking laughter. "Come on, Christian, you can't just nurse a glass of wine all night," my wife Laura teased, her tone light but sharp. Her lips curled into a charming smile, the kind that had always made her the life of the party. She had a natural ability to draw people in, effortlessly winning their attention and affection. The guests laughed along with her. For a moment, I joined in, forcing a chuckle. But something gnawed at me, a faint unease I couldn't quite place. "How about a double whiskey?" Laura added, nudging a glass toward me with a playful wink. I hesitated, glancing at the amber liquid. The pressure was suffocating. Pressure from the group and from my own insecurities. I didn't want to seem like the buzzkill, the guy who couldn't keep up. So, I took the glass and swallowed my reservations. As the evening unfolded, the alcohol began to loosen my tongue, but it seemed to tighten everything else. The jokes about my reluctance to drink grew more frequent. Some were light-hearted, but there was an undertone to them, something cruel and cutting. Laura's laughter echoed through the room, and instead of comforting me, it left me unsettled. What should have been a carefree evening felt increasingly off-kilter. Something inside me shifted, but I couldn't yet put my finger on it. The hours dragged on. The clinking glasses, bursts of laughter, and swirling conversations became a blur. I drank more than I should have. My head spun, but I pushed through, determined to keep up appearances. Then came the moment that shattered everything. My son, Jonas, pulled me aside. At barely 17, he was a quiet, thoughtful teenager, always more mature than his years. His usual carefree demeanor was replaced by a solemn intensity. His eyes, wide and troubled, locked onto mine. "Dad, I need to tell you something," he whispered, his voice low and urgent. He led me to the far end of the house, away from the party's noise. My chest tightened. "What is it?" His voice cracked slightly as he spoke. "Mom's been seeing someone else." The words hit me like a thunderclap. My vision blurred, and the room seemed to close in around me. My mind raced, struggling to process what I had just heard. Jonas's face told me he wasn't lying. Pale and tense, he looked as though he had been carrying this weight for far too long. "I'm sorry I didn't tell you earlier," he said, his tone apologetic yet firm. "I wasn't sure if you knew, but I overheard them talking. She's been seeing someone for months." I wanted to respond, to say something, anything, that would make sense of the chaos swirling in my mind. But no words came. The ground beneath me felt unsteady, and I gripped a nearby counter for support. Jonas's voice softened, but his next words cut even deeper. "It's not just that, Dad. She's been different. I saw her texting him tonight, during the party. She hides it, but I've seen enough to know." The shock didn't stay confined to my chest. It clawed at my mind, spreading like wildfire. Every laugh, every teasing comment from Laura throughout the night now carried a different weight. The image of her texting someone else, even as we hosted our friends and family, was seared into my thoughts. Jonas looked at me, his expression heavy with regret. "I didn't want to hurt you by saying this, but I thought you needed to know." I stood there, frozen. The laughter and chatter from the party felt distant, muffled, as if coming from another world. A storm was brewing within me, and I knew nothing would ever be the same. I could see flashes of moments, tiny details I had dismissed, now glaringly obvious. The late nights at the office that Laura never explained, the distant look in her eyes when I spoke about our future, The way her phone screen would flicker when I walked into the room, and the sudden silence when I casually asked who she was texting. But the worst part wasn't just a betrayal. It was how perfectly she had hidden it from me, how easily she played the part of the devoted wife. I had been so consumed by my own world, my career, my successes in finance, the relentless pressure to climb higher up the corporate ladder, that I never noticed the cracks in our marriage. And, perhaps even worse, I hadn't noticed the cracks in myself. Laura had been my everything, the woman I married in a small chapel in Switzerland, the woman who stood by my side during the early struggles of our life. I had thought we had built something solid, something unbreakable. But now I felt like an actor on a stage, only to realize the script was a lie. Later that night, when the party had started to wind down, I decided I couldn't keep silent any longer. The guests were still chatting in the next room, their laughter a distant hum. But I found Laura alone in the garden. She was standing under the moonlight, staring up at the sky as though searching for answers in its cold glow. "Laura," I said, my voice trembling, "we need to talk." She didn't turn around at first. When she finally did, her eyes met mine and they held nothing, no regret, no guilt, just a coldness that felt like a slap to the face. "What is it, Christian?" she asked, her tone sharp and dismissive. "Still sulking about your inability to drink?" Her words stung, but Jonas's voice echoed in my mind, steadying me. I couldn't hold back any longer. "I know, Laura. About you and him. About everything." Her expression changed then, but not in the way I had anticipated. There was no shock, no denial, no attempt at pleading for forgiveness. Instead, her face settled into something that looked almost resigned. "How much do you know?" she asked quietly, as though bracing herself for a punchline. "I know enough," I replied, my voice steady despite the turmoil churning inside me. "I know you've been seeing someone else. I know you've been hiding it for months." She sighed, a sound that felt more like relief than regret, and took a step closer to me. "Christian," she said softly, "it's not what you think. I never wanted to hurt you, but things change. People change." The words hung in the air, cold and cutting. My mind flashed back to the life we had built together, the nights spent dreaming about the future, the struggles we had overcome hand in hand, the love I thought was unshakable. Now, it all seemed like a cruel joke. "Is that supposed to make this easier?" I asked, my voice rising slightly. "To know that while I was working to provide for us, to build a life for our family, you were changing." Laura looked down, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of something, maybe regret, maybe guilt, but it was gone as quickly as it appeared. "This isn't just about you, Christian," she said, her tone defensive now. "It's about us. We've been drifting apart for years, and you know it." I shook my head, my fists clenching at my sides. "You could have talked to me, Laura. You could have said something. Anything. Instead, you chose this." She took another step forward, her face calm, but her voice sharper. "And what would you have done, Christian? Would you have listened? Or would you have just buried yourself deeper in your work, pretending everything was fine?" Her words hit their mark, cutting through me with precision. For a brief moment, I felt the weight of her accusation settle over me. Maybe I had been blind to the cracks in our relationship. Maybe I had been too focused on the future to see what was happening in the present. But that didn't excuse her choices. It didn't excuse the betrayal. "This isn't my fault, Laura," I said firmly. "You made a choice. And now, you're going to have to live with it." The silence between us was deafening. For the first time in my life, I didn't recognize the woman standing before me. The Laura I had known was gone, replaced by someone I could no longer trust. The voices from the party drifted into the garden, distant and meaningless. The life I thought I had built was crumbling, piece by piece, and all I could do was watch. The words hung in the air, heavy and incomprehensible. This wasn't the Laura I had married, the woman who had vowed to stand by me through thick and thin. That Laura was gone. In her place stood a stranger, a woman who had already made peace with her betrayal. The pain of her words hit me like a hammer. But even amidst the heartbreak, something darker stirred within me. A cold, unyielding resolve began to take root. I had been wronged, humiliated, and I was done playing the fool. "Why?" I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. "Why him?" Laura hesitated, her eyes flickering with something that resembled guilt, though only for a moment. Then her lips curled into a smirk, one that cut deeper than any words ever could. "Because," she said, her tone chillingly calm, "he makes me feel alive again, Christian. I haven't felt alive in years." The air between us grew suffocating. Her admission stripped away the last vestiges of the love I once held for her. I wasn't angry anymore. I was resolved, done with the lies, the pretense, and the facade we had been maintaining. In the days that followed, I kept my distance from Laura. On the surface, I seemed calm, but inside, my mind churned with thoughts of revenge. Not the dramatic, violent kind you'd see in movies. No, my revenge would be precise and calculated. It would target the very foundation of the world she had so carefully built for herself. I started small, my moves deliberate and methodical. I quietly withdrew funds from our shared accounts, ensuring every transaction was untraceable. I knew how much Laura's luxurious lifestyle depended on our finances, and I intended to take that comfort away. Next, I turned my attention to her career. Using subtle suggestions and well-placed remarks, I began sowing seeds of doubt about her competence among her colleagues. I didn't aim to destroy her outright. I wanted to erode her reputation slowly, piece by piece. Weeks passed, and the cracks in Laura's life grew deeper. Her once stellar career began to falter. The people she had leaned on, the colleagues she had charmed, began to distance themselves. Her access to the lavish comforts she once took for granted dwindled. And through it all, I remained in the background, silent and watchful, as her carefully curated life began to crumble. One evening, after a particularly tense and quiet dinner, Laura finally approached me. Her face was pale, her eyes sunken with desperation. She stood before me, looking like a woman who had lost everything. "I don't know how much longer I can take this," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" I looked at her, my heart devoid of the love and warmth it once held. There was no anger left in me, only a cold finality. "I want nothing from you, Laura," I said, my voice calm and steady. "I just wanted you to feel what it's like to lose everything, because that's what you've done to me." Without waiting for her reply, I turned and walked away. I gathered my son, Jonas, and left the life we had once shared. I was done with the charade. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, I began to rebuild. Stronger, wiser, forever changed. In time, I came to understand a truth that had eluded me before. Betrayal doesn't happen all at once. It's a slow, gradual erosion, like the wearing away of a cliff, grain by grain, until the collapse is inevitable. But revenge, when done with precision and restraint, is just the beginning of healing. And yet, as I moved forward, I discovered an even deeper truth. Sometimes, the greatest revenge is simply moving on, finding happiness without the ones who tried to break you.